On the night Evelyn Duval vanished, the rain did not fall. It swallowed the world. It came down in sheets so thick the Mississippi disappeared into darkness. So relentless that even the cypress trees seemed to bend away from it, as if they knew something was about to be erased by morning. The mistress of one of the most powerful plantations in St. James Parish was gone, and so was the man they said took her. But here is the question no one could answer then, and no one can answer now. Did she run, or was she silenced? April 14th, 1847, a small notice appeared in the St. Charles Herald, tucked between advertisements for cotton gins and miracle tonics. Missing Mrs. Evelyn Duval, wife of plantation owner Gerard Duval. Last seen evening of April 10th, reward offered for information leading to her safe return. Simple, clean, respectable, but nothing about what happened at the Duval plantation that week was simple. To understand the disappearance, you must first see the house, 12 white columns rising above the Mississippi, like something carved from pride itself. A symbol of order, of wealth, of control. Gerard Duval inherited it in 1839 and expanded it aggressively. Bank records from New Orleans show land purchases stacking year after year. By 1845, more than 100 enslaved people worked those fields, sugarcane stretching endlessly toward the horizon. On paper, it was prosperity. In truth, it was pressure. And in 1844, Evelyn arrived, daughter of a Charleston shipping merchant, beautiful, educated, married not for love, but for alliance. The newspapers described her as refined and luminous. But letters she wrote to her cousin in Virginia told another story. The air here, the house, feels like a museum where I am both exhibit and visitor. From the beginning, something was wrong. Those who saw her at social gatherings described her as quiet to quiet. Margaret Fontaine, wife of a neighboring planter, wrote in her diary that Evelyn's eyes seemed to take in everything, watching, measuring, waiting. Then, in January of 1846, Gerard Duval purchased a man at the New Orleans slave market, Henry Carter, approximately 26 years old, literate, skilled in carpentry, of sound body and temperament. One detail in the bill of sale stood out: to serve in-house and manage library organization, a rare assignment. The Duval Library was extensive volumes of Voltaire, Rousseau, European political theory, philosophy, ideas about liberty, ideas forbidden to men like Henry and dangerous in the hands of women like Evelyn. What happened inside that library, no ledger recorded, but something shifted. By Christmas of 1846, neighbors noticed Evelyn distracted during church service, excusing herself early, avoiding conversation. In March of 1847, plantation records show disciplinary action. Henry found in mistress's private sitting room, without permission, reassigned to the fields. Then just days later, returned to the house, at mistress's insistence. That single line in the ledger glows like a warning flare across time. At mistress's insistence, by April 10, 1847, the storm clouds had already begun gathering. Gerard left for New Orleans on business, expected to return in 3 days. Heavy rains began at sunset, the cook later told investigators. Evelyn requested tea be brought to the library around 8 in the evening. After that, nothing. By morning, Evelyn Duval was gone, and so was Henry Carter. What followed was not grief, it was control. Gerard returned immediately, organized search parties, 50 men with dogs, swamps, combed roads, checked newspapers, printed the narrative before questions were even formed. Respected planter's wife, abducted by runaway slave. Reward offered for capture, dead or alive. The story hardened quickly, too quickly, but cracks appeared. Rachel, Evelyn's lady's maid, told authorities her mistress had been packing a small valise for days, adding items slowly, carefully, so no one would notice. That statement disappeared from official records, but it survived in the private notes of Sheriff Thomas Wilkinson, hidden like so many other things. An inventory of Evelyn's belongings revealed missing clothes, missing personal items, and missing books. Voltaire Rousseau titles ordered the previous autumn. Gerard claimed Henry had stolen them. Yet a riverboat captain came forward with a strange report. On the morning of April 11th, he saw a white woman and a black man board his vessel 10 miles downriver. They purchased passage to New Orleans. They sat close, spoke little. The woman wore a dark veil. When asked if she appeared under duress, the captain replied, "No more than any woman traveling with a man." That single sentence unsettled the entire parish. If she had been taken, why no struggle? Why no call for help? Why a veil? Why books? Why pack slowly? Why insist he return to the library? As days turned to weeks, the narrative began to tremble. Whispers spread that the Duval marriage had not been peaceful, that Gerard's temper was known, that Evelyn had become too curious, too sympathetic, too independent. But the official story never changed. Abduction, runaway, crime. By autumn, public interest faded. Gerard sold the plantation, returned to France, citing unhappy memories. 2 years later, the Duval mansion burned to the ground. Official cause lightning, local rumor arson, and beneath that burned house, beneath the charred beams and collapsed roof, lay a root cellar, unsearched, undocumented, unspoken. For more than a century, the case slept, filed away under unresolved crimes. But in 1958, during renovations in a French Quarter townhouse, a sealed tin box was discovered inside a wall. Inside it, a water-damaged journal, property of historians, dated it to the mid-1840s. The fragments that survived would ignite the mystery all over again. G treats his books with more tenderness than he has ever shown me. The new man H understands their value. He speaks of authors I had not expected anyone here to know. And later, H and I discussed Rousseau when G was occupied. He has learned through paths I cannot imagine knowledge, despite every barrier. Then a shift in tone. G struck me today when I protested H's reassignment. If only he knew the thoughts that now occupy my mind. And finally, we have agreed. When G goes to New Orleans, the riverboat at dawn, H says there are people in the city who can help us reach Philadelphia. I take only what cannot be replaced. My heart races with fear, and something else, perhaps the first true hope I have felt since coming to this dreadful place. Hope, not terror, not captivity. Hope. If the journal is real, then the abduction narrative collapses. If the journal is real, then April 10th was not a kidnapping, it was an escape. But if they planned to leave, if they packed carefully, if they boarded a boat, then why did no one ever find them? Why no clear record? Why no certain ending? Because this is where the story splits in two. One path leads north toward freedom, new names, a carpentry shop in Philadelphia, a marriage certificate under aliases, a life built in shadow. The other path leads down into a cellar, locked door, 3 days, a jealous husband, a fire, and soil that refuses to grow crops before we can follow either path. We must return to that rain-soaked night, to the library, to the cellar, to the man who left for New Orleans, and perhaps never truly left at all, because whatever happened on April 10th, 1847, was not a simple disappearance. It was a fracture, a crack in the polished facade of the antebellum South, a moment when the lines between captor and captive, power and vulnerability, possession and love, blurred beyond recognition, and somewhere in the storm, two people made a choice, or had that choice taken from them. This is where the truth begins, not in the newspapers, not in the reward notices, but in whispers, in hidden pages, in burned foundations, in stories that refuse to stay buried, and if you listen closely, you can still hear the rain falling. Over the house, over the river, over the place where the cellar door may have opened, or may have closed, forever. The official version of events was printed before the mud from the search party boots had even dried. Evelyn Duval abducted Henry Carter. Oh, fugitive violence, implied honor, defended reward, offered it, was clean it, was convenient it, was powerful, and it was exactly the kind of story the South knew how to tell, because, in 1847, Louisiana did not have room for scandal at the top of its sugar empires, especially not a scandal that blurred the rigid lines between race, ownership, and obedience. So the narrative moved fast, too fast. Within 48 hours, posters were nailed to trees, from St. James Parish to New Orleans, describing Henry Carter. In precise detail: height 5 feet 9, scar on left forearm lit by Mrs. Duval, believed taken against her will. No mention of a packed valise, no mention of missing books, no mention of a lady's maid who had whispered that her mistress did not look afraid in the hours before the storm. Sheriff Thomas Wilkinson rode out with his men the morning after the disappearances. Private notebook tells a different story than his public report. Public report tracks found leading toward river. Private note tracks unclear due to heavy rain. Public report signs of forced note: no overturned furniture, no broken locks. Public reproduction probable. Private note: mistress's wardrobe partially emptied. Books missing. Why remove books in haste? Even in 1847, contradictions had weight, but weight only matters if someone is willing to lift it. Gerard Duval was not a man who allowed others to lift anything that threatened him. His statement to authorities was composed, measured, wounded. My wife was fragile of disposition. The man Carter had been insolent. I feared his influence. Curious word: not violent, not criminal influence. What influence could a literate, enslaved carpenter possibly have over the mistress of a grand plantation? And less that influence was stotenless, it was conversationless, it was awakening. The riverboat captain's testimony reached the parish courthouse 3 days later. Captain Elijah Mora, steamboat Belle of Baton Rouge, he claimed a veiled woman matching Evelyn's description boarded his vessel at dawn. April 11th, accompanied by a black man carrying a small trunk. They purchased tickets to New Orleans, paid in cash. When asked if the woman seemed distressed, he paused, then said she seemed resolved. Resolved, another dangerous word, because resolve is not the language of captivity, is the language of decision, suggests choicey. The parish elite dismissed his statement quickly. Rain, confusion, mistaken identity, folk, unreliable. But Sheriff Wilkinson did not dismiss it. His notebook entry that evening reads: if captain speaks true, then narrative shifts entirely. Need corroboration. Corroboration arrived from an unexpected place. A dock worker named Samuel Price reported seeing the pair disembark in New Orleans. He remembered them because the woman nearly slipped on the wet planks, and the man steadied her. She laughed again. No sign of force, no cry for help, no visible restraint from New Orleans. The trail fractures. Hotel registries show no Duval, no Carter, but one ledger at the St. Louis Hotel contains an entry dated April 11. Thrister and Mrs. William Harestal paid cash, stayed one night, left before dawn. Handwriting analysis conducted more than a century later would suggest the signature resembles Evelyn's surviving letters. Not proof, but possibly is where this case begins to breathe. Meanwhile, back in St. James Parish, Gerard intensified the surgery wards. increased bounties, offered dead or alive. He rode through the fields. Himself, public grief, displayed, private temper, rumored enslaved. Workers later told descendants that the house felt different, that we quiet a tenser as if something had broken long before the storm arrived. One elderly man's oral testimony, recorded in the 1930s, includes a haunting detail. He said the master searched the cellar himself the night he returned from New Orleans alone with a lantern. No one else permitted near. Why search a cellar if your wife had been taken down river? Why descend into darkness if your story pointed north? Cellar would become central decades later, but for now the narrative continued to stretch toward escape. In 1847, the Underground Railroad was not a railroad at all. It was a network of whispers, safe houses, sympathetic clergy, free black communities, and white abolitionists willing to risk prison. Philadelphia was one of its beating heart's. Records from the Vigilance Committee there include a cryptic entry dated May 1847, to arrivals from Louisiana: 1 male carpenter skilled, 1 female educated, names withheld for safety, assisted onward. It does not say Henry, but it does say Louisiana, and it does say top in a history, and debate whether that entry connects to the Duval custom. Argue coincidence, others argue coded protection, because if a white woman fled willingly with an enslaved man, the consequences would have been explosive, not just socially, but legally. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 would later intensify capture efforts, but even in 1847, assisting an escape carried risks or names. Banistricts obscured, silence protected the living. In Louisiana, rumors multiplied. Some said Evelyn had been bewitched, others claimed Henry had manipulated her with forbidden literature. Still others whispered that Gerard's cruelty had driven her away, but no one dared challenge him publicly. He was powerful, connected, financially entangled with banks in New Orleans and Bordeaux. When he announced the plantation would be sold, few questioned. It claimed painful memories could not remain where tragedy occurred, yet financial documents show declining sugar yields even before the disappearance, debt creeping quietly into the margin. When was Evelyn's vanishing report, lightning strike during summer, weather records show clear skies that evening. The blaze destroyed what remained of lettuce, furniture, interior records, and possibly ever diseased. Beneath that house lay the cellar, stone lined clue used for storage, wine, root, vegetables. Through a narrow wooden door after the fire, debris collapsed into its entrance, sealing it for generations. The case faded into folklore. Children dared each other to approach the overgrown foundation. Old women claimed to hear weeping when rain fell hard, but history is patient. 1958, a renovation project in New Orleans uncovered the journal fragments, signed simply E. when scholars authenticated the ink and paper to the 1840 Esther Duval mystery returned to life. The pages described fear, yes, but also planning, discussion, shared reading, a longing for freedom that pulsed through every surviving line, and one sentence that reframed everything: I will not remain property of a man simply because the law allows him to believe. So that line alone shattered the fragile certainty of abduction, because it suggested Evelyn saw herself as confined, as owned, as trapped, not by Henry but by Gerard. And yet for every document suggesting escape there remains an absence: no confirmed death certificate, no confirmed marriage record bearing her true name, no grave, no definitive proof she lived beyond 1847. And in mysteries like this, absence is not emptiness, it is pressure, it is a shadow that demands attention. Because if she reached Philadelphia, why no trace beyond whisper? If she did not, why did Gerard search the cellar? Why did the fire follow? Why did soil above the foundation resist crops for decades? 2 does not answer these questions, it deepens. Demet takes the clean printed story and pulls at its threads until what once looked solid begins to unravel, because somewhere between the riverboat ticket and the sealed cellar door, truth waits, and the deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes. Not just for the Duval name, but for the version of history that prefers obedience over autonomy, that prefers abduction over agency, that prefers silence over scandal. The rain that fell on April 10th washed away footprints, but it did not wash away doubt, and doubt, and like ink does not fade easily. As we move forward, the trail will lead north, and it will lead down into archives, into soil, into memory, and into a question that refuses to die. If Evelyn Duval chose freedom, who helped her disappear? And if she did not, who made sure she never spoke again? If Evelyn Duval survived that storm, she did not survive it as Evelyn Duval. She would have stepped off the riverboat, not as a planter's wife, but as a shadow, and shadows do not leave signatures, they leave traces. First trace appears in New Orleans, 11th 1847. A clerk at the St. Louis Hotel records the arrival of Mr. and Mrs. William Harris of Charleston, Cashno. Baggage beyond a modest trunk departed before sunrise. The ink is hurried, the handwriting slightly slanted. A century later, a forensic analyst compared that signature to 3 verified letters written by Evelyn in 1845. The loops on the capital W, the hesitation before the final snot, identical but close enough to unsettle certainty. From New Orleans, the Underground Railroad did not run on tracks, it ran on trust, passed from dock worker to preacher, from preacher to carriage driver, from carriage driver to a safe house, whose windows remained shuttered even in daylight. In May 1847, the Vigilance Committee of Philadelphia recorded a brief entry to from Louisiana men skilled with woodwoman, educated names, withheld forwarded, onward. It is the kind of entry historians argue about for decades, because it is both something and nothing. It does not prove Evelyn, but it does not deny her. Either. Philadelphia in the late 1840s was a city alive with tension-free. Black communities thrived alongside violent opposition. A place where abolitionist pamphlets were printed in one building, while pro-slavery mobs gathered in another. If Evelyn and Henry arrived there, they would have arrived at the edge of a fragile promise, freedom but fragile. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 would soon make that freedom even more dangerous, allowing slave catchers to pursue alleged runaways into free state. Financial incentive to judges who ruled in favor of capture. If Henry reached Philadelphia in 1847, he would have known that safety was temporary, borrowed season. Yet there is a record from 1848 that complicates everything. A carpentry workshop opened in the Northern Liberties District, owned by a man named William Carter. In cabinetry and architectural detail, the census lists him as black, born in Virginia, age approximately 27, literate, married, listed as Eliza White, born in South Carolina, age 24. The ages align, the origins align, the profession aligns, but the names do not. And that is exactly what makes it possible, because to survive in a world hunting you do not keep your name, you bury it. The workshop prospered modestly. City directories from 1849 and 1850 include William Carter Cabinet Utamake at 214 Green Street. By 1851, the listing disappears. No explanation, no bankruptcy, no death certificate, just absence. Did they flee? Again, did they move north to New York or across the border into Canada where American slave catchers held no authority. There is one more thread in 1852, a passenger manifest from a vessel traveling to Montreux, lists W. Carter Carpenter, accompanied by wife E. Carter, both declared free. Person signed in careful script. The ship departed from New York Rye without incident. Montreal, in the 1850s, was a destination for many, escaping the tightening grip of American law. Church records from a small Anglican parish there include a burial entry dated 1861, Eliza Carter, age 37, Casfever, no birthplace recorded, no family noted. This Eliza was Evelyn. She would have died 14 years after the storm. 14 years of borrowed identity, 14 years of secrecy, 14 years of looking over her shoulder is a possibility, but it is not proof, because while the northern trail suggests reinvention, the southern soil suggests something else entirely. In 1966, archaeologists conducting a survey of the former Duval Plantation site made a discovery beneath layers of ash and collapsed timber. The roots cellar sealed since the fire. When they cleared debris from its entrance, they found the stone steps intact. The air inside was thick, as if it had been holding its breath for a century. They catalogued wine bottles, broken crates, iron hinges, but near the back wall, ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly disturbance in the soil beneath the stone floor. 3 feet deep, roughly human in length. Excavation was delayed due to funding. By the time permits were secured, the Mississippi had flooded. Water seeped into the excavation trench, collapsing sections of the foundation. The anomaly dissolved into mud. No remains were recovered, no confirmation, only suspicion. Adding to that suspicion were fragments of a letter discovered in 1998 in a private collection dated April 8, 1847, 2 days before the disappearance. The letter appears to be written by Gerard to an associate in New Orleans. She grows restless, influenced by ideas beyond her station. If matters do not correct themselves, I shall take decisive action. Decisive action. Those words echo differently when read alongside the cellar anomaly, and yet there is also Gerard's own journal, discovered in Bordeaux decades later. He writes, in 1848, loss follows me across the ocean. I see her in every crowded street. If she lives, I hope she never thinks of me. If she is dead, may God forgive what I could not prevent. Ambiguous confessional. Performative. We cannot know because this case exists between two landscapes, the north of possibility and the south of suspicion. One tells a story of forbidden love and daring escape, books that awakened courage of a woman who refused to remain properly. The other tells a story of pride wounded, of reputation threatened, of a man descending into a cellar with a lantern while rain drowned the world above it. 2013, another attempt was made to survey the site. Advanced imaging technology. The 19th century could never imagine again an anomaly appeared in roughly the same location. Can funding complications stalled full excavation again? Heavy rains flooded the trench before confirmation. Some locals believe the land does not wish to surrender its secret. Others believe coincidence is not conspiracy, but history rarely leaves perfect evidence. But when powerful people benefit from silence by Act 3, the mystery no longer belongs to 1847. Elenet stretches forward, touching archivists, archaeologists, descendants, scholars. Each generation pulling at the same threads, and each generation finding both more and less than the one before, because every new document suggests survival, every disturbance in the soil suggests burial. The deeper we go, the less certain we become, perhaps, that is the point, because certainty comforts but uncertainty haunts. If Evelyn reached Philadelphia, she became Eliza. If she lived quietly in Montreal, then the story is one of transformation, of risk rewarded, of identity reclaimed. But if she never left Louisiana, the cellar held her final breath. If the fire erased what remained, then the story is darker, a cautionary tale buried beneath pride and power. And so we stand between two endings, one written in fading ink, one written in shifting earth, neither fully legible. Refusing to disappear, the river carried something away in April 1847. Whether it was to fugitives seeking freedom or the last trace of a silenced voice, we do not yet know, but the deeper we dig, the more it feels as though the truth is not lost and illy the final act to force it into light. By the time the 20th century arrived, the Duval plantation no longer stood as a house, it stood as a room of tangled vines, where columns once cast long shadows, broken bricks half swallowed by grass, and beneath it all, the cellar sealed, perhaps protected because some stories do not disappear. They wait. In 1932, a local schoolteacher named Clara Baptiste began collecting oral histories from elderly residents of St. James Parish. She did not intend to resurrect a scandal. She wanted to preserve memory before it vanished. But memory has a way of leading you exactly where it wants. One former field hand, nearly 90 years old at the time of the interview, told her something chilling. He said the mistress did not scream that night. He said the storm was loud enough to hide anything. Said the master walked toward the cellar after midnight, carrying a lantern alone. And Clara asked how he could know that after so many years. He cried because no one else was allowed near that door. Again, that testimony never made it into official archives. It remained in Clara's handwritten notebook stored in a cedar chest until her granddaughter donated it to a university collection in 1978. By then, historians had already begun reopening the Duval case, and what they found was not clarity but collision. Two timelines to narratives, both stubborn. Both in 1958, when the journal fragments signed E. were authenticated, scholars leaned toward escape. The language was vivid, urgent, livid, described planning, fear, hope not, despair nor resignation. The final readable entry ends mid-sentence: tomorrow we leave, before the page torn or damaged by water or deliberately removed. No one could agree, but hope pulses in those words. Tomorrow we leave, and yet the cellar would not remain quiet. In 1966, when the first excavation exposed the stone steps, archaeologists reported something unusual. The interior back wall showed signs of recent disturbance relative to the rest of the structure. Not modern but not original stone, slightly misaligned mortar, inconsistent, as if something had been opened and closed again. Funding ran thin again. The excavation halted. Some locals claimed Gerard returned secretly after selling the property, that he ordered the cellar altered before departing for France. There is no direct proof of this, but there is a shipping record from 1848 showing Gerard transported several large crates labeled household items to border. No inventory survives, just weight measurements. Weight can hide many things. In 1998, the letter fragments surfaced. Gerard writing days before the disappearance: if matters do not correct themselves, I shall take decisive action. Historians debated tone. Was he speaking of business, of marriage, of rebellion, or of something darker then? In 2013, advanced ground-penetrating radar scanned the plantation site. Again, technology capable of mapping what the I cannot see anomaly reappeared. Same dimensions, same depth, 3 feet beneath where the cellar floor once lay. Time archaeologists prepared for immediate excavation. Media attention surged. Headlines declared new evidence may solve 166-year-old mystery, and then the Mississippi rose floodwaters, swept across the site with a force that stunned even seasoned researchers. Trench collapsed, the anomaly dissolved into slurry, and the moment passed. Skeptos call it coincidence, believers call it resistance, because some in St. James Parish insist the land does not want the truth exposed, that the cellar holds more than stone, it holds a choice, and exposing that choice would fracture more than history, it would fracture legacies. By the early 2000s, genealogists traced Gerard Duval's lineage to descendants still living in France. When contacted, most declined to comment. One distant relative agreed to share a translated excerpt from Gerard's private journal dated March 1848. She believed ideas beyond her understanding. He poised her mind with words. I sought only to restore order. Loaded word, order in a world built on ownership, order in a marriage defined by power, order threatened by a woman who read Rousseau, who questioned confinement, who perhaps loved dangerously, or perhaps simply desired autonomy. In 1847, Louisiana was revolutionary, especially for a white woman aligning herself with an enslaved manif. She chose escape, she shattered the social hierarchy. If she was silent, she became a warning. Ether system could not allow her story to stand un. 2021, a small memorial marker was placed near the Plantation site. It does not claim murder, did not confirm escape. It reads in memory of Evelyn Duval, whose fate remains unknown, made truth endure beyond silence. The wording was carefully negotiated, wanted neutrality, descendants wanted dignity, community leaders wanted peace, because the Duval case is no longer just about one night. It is about narrative control, about who writes history and who disappears within it. Act 4 is where the mystery becomes heavier, not because we lack information, but because we have too much fragments pointing in opposite directions, each plausibly. Evelyn reached Philadelphia. Why does no undeniable document confirm her life beyond aliases? If she died in Montreal, why no family record claiming her? If she never left Louisiana, why no physical remains despite repeated searches? Unless the remains were moved, unless the cellar was altered, unless the fire was not accident, unless the flood was cruel, unless we are chasing ghosts created by longing, because sometimes the desire for justice reshapes evidence, and sometimes silence is not conspiracy, but lows the soil at the plantation still resists cultivation. Farmers in the late 19th century noted poor yield over the foundation, site crops, withered roots, stunted. Agricultural scientists later suggested ash concentration from the fire altered the pH. A rational explanation, yet locals prefer another, that something beneath the earth disrupts growth, that the ground remembers. As historians cross-reference manifests and parish records, as archaeologists recalibrate equipment, as genealogists trace bloodlines, the central question tightens: did Evelyn Duval choose freedom, more was freedom chosen for her by someone else? And perhaps the most unsettling possibilities, that both stories contain truth. Perhaps she attempted escape, perhaps she was intercepted, perhaps the river carried hope only for it to be dragged back to the cellar. We do not know, but the closer we move toward the final act, the more the mystery feels deliberate, as if someone wanted the truth, blurting off evidence to spark doubt, not enough to confirm guilt, enough hope to imagine survival, not enough to declare it. And so we stand once more at the foundation, at the place where a house once stood, at the threshold of a cellar that has been opened, closed, flooded, debated, but never fully answered, because the final act will not hand us certainty, will force us to choose which story we believe. What that belief says not about 1847, but about us, about power, about freedom, about the cost of defiance, and about the way history is remembered, and who is rewritten. The rain that night washed away footprints, but it did not wash away. Somewhere beneath shifting soil or northern sky the truth still waits for its final reckoning. Stand with me one last time at the edge of the Mississippi. Close your eyes here. The water moving slow and heavy beneath a sky that has seen empires rise and collapse. Because whatever happened on April 10th, 1847, did not end. That night it became something larger, something that refused burial. History prefers clean endings. A body found, a marriage certificate discovered, a confession signed, but the Duval mystery offers none of that. It offers tension to stories locked in opposition, both breathing, both in. Evelyn Duval escaped. Then she did something almost unthinkable for her time. She rejected wealth, status, security. She risked her life and reputation to follow an idea born in forbidden books, an idea whispered in a library where a carpenter spoke of liberty. She escaped. Then the storm that night was not a cover for violence. It was camouflage for courage. Picture Eta veiled woman stepping onto a riverboat at dawn, heart pounding, not from fear of the man beside her, but from fear of being seen as a victim, but as a traitor to her own class. Imagine the courage required to abandon your name, to let Evelyn Duval die so Eliza Carter could live, to walk streets where no one knows your history, to build a life from skill and secrecy, to love in a world that would call that love a crime. If she reached Philadelphia, she reached Montreal, if she was buried under a modest stone bearing another name, then she won something. Regency, the right to choose, even if that choice demanded exile. But if she did not escape, if the cellar beneath the plantation holds the final echo of her breaths, in the story darkens. Because that means the rain was not camouflage, it was concealment for a decision made in anger or fear or wounded pride. It means the lantern descending the cellar steps was not searching, it was restoring. It means the fire 2 years later was not accident, it was irrationed. The sealed stone floor was not coincident, it was intention. In that version of events, Evelyn did not vanish, was made to vanish, and the official story of abduction was crafted not to find her but to protect a manto, preserve reputation, to maintain order. The word Jera wrote in his journal, order, restored a death, and any cost, both possibilities exist. And here, in the final act, we confront something deeper than evidence. We confront what each version demands of Usif. She escaped then. The system was not absolute, it could be defied. Books could ignite rebellion. Conversation could spark transformation. Love could cross boundaries carved in law. That ending is dangerous in its own way, because it suggests freedom is possible even within chains. If she was killed, then the system functioned exactly as designed, punishing deviations, silencing power. That ending is not hopeful, but it is brutally honest about the world of 1847, and perhaps about the world beyond it. For more than a century, the earth has guarded its answer, flooding, trenches collapsing, excavations, freeing anomalies. But no confirmation. Archives have done the same, providing fragments, not finality, because sometimes truth is not a single event. Sometimes it is the tension between narratives. The Duval case has become less about solving a disappearance and more about confronting how history is written? Who controls the first report? Who shapes the headlines? Who decides which testimony is credible and which is dismissed? Remember how quickly the newspapers printed abduction, how swiftly Henry Carter became criminal, how neatly Evelyn became victim. The story fit expectations, so it survived. But the journal agenta, hotel registry, the census entry, the Montreal burial, the cellar anomaly. They resist neatness. They demand discomfortant. Perhaps that is the real legacy of April 10th, 1847. Discomforting. Either outcome challenges the narrative of control. If she chose freedom, she exposes the fragility of the system. If she was silenced, she exposes its cruelty. And here we stand, generations later, still asking, still digging, still arguing. We because something in this story feels unfinished, not just factually, emotionally. Want to know whether courage triumphed or whether power prevailed. We want the satisfaction of certainty, but certainty may be the one thing this story will never give. Instead, it gives us a mirror. It asks what we believe about agency, about oppression, about love, about defiance. It asks whether we trust official records, hidden journals, whether we place faith in soil or in ship manifests. And maybe the final truth is this: Evelyn Duval exists now in both endings. She is the woman stepping onto a northern street under a borrowed name, and she is the whisper beneath Louisiana soil. She is hope and she is warning, because the absence of her confirmed fate has made her larger than any single conclusion. 2021, when the memorial marker was placed near the plantation ruins, visitors left flowers, some white, some red, some placed a single book beside the stone. A copy of Rousseau left open to a passage about Libertino. One knows who placed it there, but it remained 4 weeks before rain finally blurred the pages. Rain, Agon always reigned, the same element that marked her disappearance, the same element that has interrupted excavations, the same element that seems to guard the threshold between knowledge and mystery. What happened on April 10th, 1847? Did two figures disappear into the storm, chasing a future forbidden by their time more? Did the storm hide a final act of control? The truth may lie beneath 3 feet of earth, or beneath a name changed in a northern ledger. Perhaps it lies in the tension itself, the refusal of the story to settle, because some mysteries are not meant to close. They are meant to challenge, to disturb, to remind us that history is not a fixed monument, is a shifting landscape. By who speaks and who is silenced? Evelyn Duval was either a fugitive of love or a victim of pride, but in the end she became something neither Gerard nor the newspapers intended. She became a question, and questions, unlike bodies, do not stay buried. So when the rain falls heavy over the Mississippi, when the river swells and the wind moves through the cypress trees, remember this: somewhere between escape and erasure, between riverboat and cellar, between Alias and Asher, woman made a choice, or had one made for her, and the world has been trying to understand it ever since.